Greetings, my fellow Americans, and welcome to another episode of the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast. Tonight's episode is going to be on the subject of propaganda. Now, I know if people who've watched my videos in the past know I've already talked about propaganda in an earlier video, which was on the subject of misinformation. It was the September 4th, 2021 podcast. And I did talk about misinformation and how propaganda is related and intertwined with misinformation. There is somewhat of a distinguishment somewhat. And so it's important, and there's actually a story, and the reason why I'm actually doing this tonight that's actually coming to the media, and it affects kind of the general overall scope. Please look back at the original podcast on this information to kind of get an idea of how it better ties into Montana, but this is going to be dealing primarily with a national story, and then I'll group it back towards Montana at the end of the podcast. But because the larger percentage of content is covered in the state version of it, I'm not going to reiterate it here and talk about the same subjects. So please just go ahead and go back and review that one, and you can get a better idea and a better background of some of the stuff, how it affects Montana specifically. But anyway, to distinguish somewhat the ideas between propaganda and misinformation. Propaganda can use misinformation, and often does, but it's not always just information. Sometimes propaganda focuses on suppression of information, suppression of the truth, or and more so even than mistruth. So the idea is that you can take little snippets of truth or alleged truth, whether it's really real or not, someone might actually believe it. For instance, I have a problem with a current situation going on with a friend who's under the rapture of a schizophrenic personality. And for whatever reason, she has just completely latched onto this person. And it's just made it impossible to try to deal with her, associate with her, because she's so far, she's just going into it. I'll provide some detail, actually. I'll go into more detail at the end of this podcast if I have time. I'll have time. But but the idea is I don't want to get distracted here at the beginning and get into the meat and bones of why this is important. And this is dealing with the subject of reality lay winner. For anyone who does not know the story, Ms. Winner, reality, was sentenced to the longest sentence ever imposed on an American citizen for release of confidential documents to a media source, allegedly under the premise that it threatened national security. It did not threaten national security. It was one document. It didn't identify any public interests. It was released publicly, ladies and gentlemen. The public can view this document. In fact, I will actually provide a link to this document in the description of this video so you can actually see and read for yourself. This document contains nothing that challenges national security. It doesn't name any agents. It doesn't name any locations or methods of retrieval. It doesn't do anything of that nature. Some kind of a fuzz on my shoulder, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what it was, but it's off now. At any rate, so, and you'll be able to see for yourself, there's absolutely nothing critical about this. But because of propaganda, Miss Winter, reality, has suffered. And she's served prison time and everything else, all because she ticked off the powers that be in the President Trump's administration. Now, just a little background. Reality is not just a nobody out there. She is a highly decorated Air Force officer. Okay? Highly decorated. When she retired from the military, she obtained a job with a private company and who happened to be a contractor for NSA because she still had earned top secret clearance through the U.S. government, through her work in the Air Force intelligence. In 2016, this is when, for anybody who needs a framework, we had two primary candidates that had settled down after the primaries. We had Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, and we had Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate. And the U.S. government, of course, has a system for anybody who doesn't understand the politics of how it works. It has a system to where we have a Democratic field of multiple candidates. We have a Republican field of multiple candidates. And then each individual state will hold a primary election and select their favorite out of that, and then that person will get a collection of votes called electoral votes, which will actually add up to a total they need to win the national primary. Now, when the Democratic candidate settled on, it was Hillary Clinton. When it was settled on for the Republican Party, it was Donald Trump. In 2016, the Russian government indisputably attempted to disrupt America's presidential election. They decided they wanted to back Donald Trump, and they did several questionable things, questionable direct threats against our security, our national interests, in influencing the election. They were posting under false names on social media advertisements that alleged wrongdoings by Hillary Clinton and that promoted Donald Trump. They were sending phishing campaigns or phishing emails, which are emails trying to solicit and change information to electorates days before the election. There was direct contact between the Trump campaign and the Russian government during the course of the election. It's indisputable. I mean, you can sit here, and the Republicans who don't want to believe it can sit there and say, "But I read the special report. I've read the classified documents, like the one that Reality has been found guilty of releasing, and it's very indisputable that Russia actively engaged and threatened our electorate system. And Donald Trump has spent the entire 4 years, and ever since he got out of office, has spent considerable amount of time denying the existence of any Russian involvement. He basically just wants everyone to believe I did it on my own, people wanted me, and refused to acknowledge the existence of the deliberate foreign tampering that occurred. There's no disputing it. The records are there. Short of denying the existence of the records and claiming the records don't exist and claiming they're all made up, and which is the very common perception of the Republican side of this argument, is that this is all made up, it's fake news. It's not fake news, ladies and gentlemen. It is actual real news. It's just not favorable to the people who don't want you to listen to it. But regardless, this is the circumstance in the scenario that in 2016, the Russian government attempted to disrupt the election. Now, the purpose of this disruption was to malign Hillary Clinton, to boost Donald Trump, and basically just to sow discord into the American political system, the electoral system. The issue is that Russia actually ordered that President Vladimir Putin, there's evidence that he actually ordered this action. This operation was called Project Lakta. And it was incredibly invasive on several fronts. It wasn't just a one single target. While Reality was working with her contracted work, she came across a confidential document that talked about one small facet of their operation, of Project Lakta. One small aspect, one small little facet, one little piece. And she recognized it for what it was. She recognized that it was going to be suppressed. And she decided that in a very Snowden sort of way, that it was in America's best interest to know this information. Now, keep in mind, by the time she released this, Donald Trump was already president. He'd won the election. He was in office. But he'd been doing his level best since he took office to suppress any information about Russian involvement. As more information came out about his own campaign's contact with Russian officials, about his political ambitions in Russia, his business ambitions in Russia, he was actually setting up a Trump hotel in Moscow. There were amenities provided to him that were revealed, some of them through the Steele dossier, which some of you may recognize the name of. If not, please look it up. STEEL, the Steele dossier, reveals some rather troubling aspects of things Trump was doing in Russia prior to his candidacy, which lend to a very strong, credible tie between President Trump and the Russian government. Now, do I think that Donald Trump was a mole planted here by the Russians and, you know, bent on destroying. No. I think Donald Trump, personal belief, not trying to launch into anti Trumpism here, personal belief, he's a businessman who wants profits above and beyond all else. And in the process of trying to do business, he made many contacts and inroads with the Russian government. But many people in foreign countries considered him a buffoon. He wasn't taken seriously, and Russia saw this as a perfect opportunity to take somebody who really had no credibility, who really had no credentials to be president, and make him president so that he'd be malleable. He had an ego. He still has an ego. You play to that ego, you can get him to do whatever you want. He was easily manipulated. He was easily controlled through, strokes to his ego or threats or anything else. Just the very idea that he had these prior affiliations was information and leverage that the Russian government could hold against him. Do I think this was done directly? Do I think in his many meetings with Vladimir Putin, he had a conversation with Putin and said, okay, Putin is my handler and I'm turning this information over and I'm disclosing? No. I don't think it went anything that deep. I think Donald Trump was a greedy man who was easily manipulated because he had an ego the size of Texas. And for anybody who knows, Texas is a very large state here in the United States. For that matter, he had an ego the size of Alaska, he had an ego the size of Canada, he had an ego the size of China. His ego was that big. Anything that fed his ego made him happy. And if you fed his ego, you made him happy, and you can get whatever you want from him. And the Russian government realizes, they recognize this. If anything, they groomed this out of him in their associations. I don't think he ran for president because the Russian government told him to. I don't think he was an agent for the Russian government. Nothing like that. I just think he was a greedy man with really not a great intellect or mind for being a president who won a popularity contest. Like it or not, he won a popularity contest and he had the money to back behind it. But this man sat up on stage and asked publicly for Russia to find Hillary Clinton's emails. Publicly announced it at a press conference. Russia, if you're listening, find Hillary Clinton's missing emails. At which point, the very next day, and intelligence documents prove this, the very next day, Russia was engaged in looking and hacking the Democratic servers. They obtained information which they turned over to which eventually got turned over to WikiLeaks, and the idea was to demolish Hillary Clinton's campaign. So, is there a direct connection between President Trump himself and Russia? No way of knowing. Are there questionable connections between this affiliation, and did Russia obviously feel they had a better control and a better circumstance if President Trump won the election? Absolutely, and that was what motivated them. Whether you see it as evil, or you see it as wicked, if you see it as anything other than just a political ambition or something, quite frankly, America's not any better. I'm not condemning Putin for this any more than I'm condemning. Yes, I'm condemning that he didn't keep his hands out of our government, out of our election. But America is just as freaking guilty. We overthrew Saddam Hussein because we didn't like him. We put our own government in there. America's guilty, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't something that's uniquely Russia. This is something every country does. They don't like a presidential candidate. They do what they can, or a candidate for election, or a candidate who's in charge, or who's in leadership. They will either remove him through political manipulation or outright force. This was an opportunity for Russia to take advantage of our electorate system and the fact that there was an easily manipulatable person who's on the ballot, and take advantage of it. That's the bottom line. So, do I think that what they did was evil? I don't think it's evil. I think it was opportunistic. I think it was definitely beneficial to them to pursue a more manageable candidate when they had more influence and they knew from history, from dealing with him, how to get what they wanted from him. But do I think that it was all this part of this big mastermind conspiracy, sleeper agents and all that? And there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about this, but I don't believe those. I just believe we're dealing with a politically ambitious superpower They saw an opportunity and a weakness in our system, and they took advantage of it, just like America does every time we take advantage of another electorate around the world, or we don't like somebody who's in a position of power or authority. We think they're authoritarian. We think whatever. We do it. We do it. I mean, I don't do it. My government does it. But regardless, enough on that tangent. Whether for ego or wrongdoing, Trump has always maintained he won on his own, and he's done everything he can to suppress any information that suggests otherwise. Enter reality. Reality Winner, as I said, was employed in a company that had a military contract with the NSA, and they were processing records and information for the NSA. And in the course of her work, she came across a confidential NSA report. It documented a record of Russian interference in the 2016 election. Once again, remember, this is April 2017, or sorry, June of 2017, June 3rd, 2017. She came across this information. Trump had won the election. Trump was already in office as of January 20th, 2017. He was already in office. There was no question that he was going to be there for 4 years. Nothing she was doing was going to undermine his election. But she was fearful this information would get suppressed. The report specifically identified phishing emails sent to election officials several days before the 2020 election. Before the 2016 election. Is a very small part of the evidence that was actually made public by both the media and by the government through a special counsel's report in later on. Reality leaked the document anonymously to a newspaper called The Intercept, or an online newspaper called The Intercept. The Intercept didn't really handle the information well. They didn't try to make any effort to try to cover up their source. They didn't know who their source was specifically, but they did not do anything to cover up where their document originated from. As a consequence, the government was able to go back and track it back to Reality. And because of their ineptitude, they exposed Reality's identity, and it led to her arrest. She was arrested before the article was even published. And then when she was convicted, she was given the longest sentence ever imposed for leaking documents. 5 years and 3 months in prison and 3 years supervision. Longest sentence ever imposed on anyone for leaking a document. Russia really was doing this. But it did not exonerate anyone. Russia's operation was called Project Lakta. It was ordered by the president of their country, Vladimir Putin. Many aspects of the operation were made public in the special counsel's report, which came out in April of 2019. In spite of this, Reality remained in custody. No pardon, no exoneration, no nothing. This information was already made public to a news media. The government itself released the information along with a host of other information, backing up and substantiating the information that Reality had released. And yet somehow Reality remained in prison. Now, the question is how this relates. I mean, how does all of this story relate to the subject we're talking about tonight? And the issue here is that the government was free to malign Reality. They published alleged excerpts from her diary. Supposedly she made claims supporting the Taliban, Osama bin Laden, and burning down the White House. The government, the prosecutors, actually published an excerpt that supposedly said, it's a Christ-like vision to have a fundamentalist Islamic state. What does her personal opinions have to do with whether or not she released a document or did anything? Of course not. But it vilified her. It took excerpts, and keep in mind, none of this has ever been verified as authentic. Reality herself was not even allowed to testify whether it was true or not, because in order to testify in her defense, she would have had to speak about the content of the document she released, and she was forbidden because the courts had declared it a sensitive matter that affected international security, international or sorry, national security, not international security, national security. Because somehow, just because it's coming from the NSA, it affects national security. And once again, I'm going to be posting a link to the art, to the actual content. You can read it for yourself, and you can see there is absolutely nothing in that document that puts any American security or espionage interest at risk. Nothing. It completely discusses the Russian sources of information. Mind you, in this report, the Intercept actually blacked it out for the purposes of that. But that's the Russian side. Nothing in the American side was even discussed in it. There was no, this agent said this, and this agent was buried, in undercover operation, and this is how we found this information out. Nothing like that. Nothing like that was in the report. And yet, because the government was able to use propaganda to go to the court and do all of this, she was maligned. Reality was perceived by the court to be a foreign sympathizer, and the government was able to prevail upon the propagandic idea that the document represented a threat to national security. The Department of Justice, under President Trump, who was actively trying to suppress information about the Russian involvement in his own campaign, pushed for and prevailed in an argument before a court that said that she was rightfully prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which only is prosecutable when an American interest is put at risk. There was no American interest put at risk. But because it also forbid her from talking about what the content of the document and her justification for releasing it, it cut out any chance of defending her case. She couldn't sit there and defend a case if she couldn't say why she was defending it. It made it impossible. In American justice, we have what's called the Brady Law, which says that a prosecutor has to turn over all documentation which may exonerate a defendant. Well, in this case, the information was turned over, and it exonerated her. It could potentially have exonerated her, but she was forbidden to even use it in her defense. Because through propaganda and selective information, the government was able to prevail in a public court that she was not allowed to speak. Now, keep in mind, this could all have gone away. All the court had to do was sequester a jury, actually put people, making sure that the jury actually consisted of individuals who had the clearance to actually hear this, to seal the courtroom, to seal the records, to make it not accessible to the public. And congratulations, you no longer have a security interest. You could have put this in front of a military tribunal. There's any number of scenarios in which this could have been done to allow Reality to defend herself, but they made it impossible for her to defend herself. They took away her only defense, which was to justify the content of the document, that it wasn't a threat to national security. It didn't represent a threat to any national security interests, and there was nothing in it that actually violated the law. But because she couldn't even say that, she had no way to defend against the crime. She had no way to defend because the Justice Department made sure to make it a public spectacle. And the public spectacle made it forbid her from actually using any content of the document to prove the charge had no validity. As a consequence, she took a plea deal and she went to prison. And she was just recently released on good behavior. Although there's much to be said about the fact she contracted COVID while she was in jail or in prison. She's suffering from health effects as a consequence of COVID. And there's many who believe that she was released for humanitarian reasons because she was suffering inside. Government's denied that, so it's not about a mercy release. It's not about anything like that. That it's for good behavior. She's an honorable as I pointed out, she's an honorable former Air Force officer, honorably discharged, highly decorated, and you're surprised she has good behavior in prison? She's a good person. She's an honorable person who saw a wrong, just like John Snowden, and decided that, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. We are going to, or she says, I'm going to do what I think is right. I'm going to leak this document because this document, it blows the lid off of any claim that President Trump has been making that Russia was not involved in manipulating the campaign. As an American citizen, wouldn't you want to make sure that document doesn't get buried so that so that aspects and steps and measures can be taken to prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future? If there are security measures that exist, sorry, my cats are over here fighting. Wait, Felicia, stop it. Sorry, everybody. My cats don't always get along. If you look at some of my other previous videos, you know I've introduced my cats. But they're over here to my right, and they were kind of starting a hissing match, and I had to break it up before it got into a full-fledged fight. Forgive the interruption, and on we go. The Russian operation that led to all of this, it was already under investigation. It was already being looked into. The special report was bound to come out. Everybody knew this. But Trump's Department of Justice wanted to make an example out of reality. This honorable, upstanding individual, this good person who wanted to do something right, was given the harshest sentence anybody has ever received under this law. Ever received under this law. But like I said, reality was forbidden from even trying to defend against the crime in which she was convicted. She went through, she pled guilty because she couldn't go to court and defend herself. And if she had gone to court and defended herself and tried to defend herself without being able to defend herself, going to court and saying, not guilty, what are you going to say in front of a jury? Yeah, I did it. Well, why'd you do it? Can't tell you why I did it. Can't justify it. Can't defend against this law because I'm forbidden to talk about the content of it. She had no chance in front of a jury. And they would have given her a harsher sentence if she tried. Because and I've talked about this in a previous video, about how the U.S. Supreme Court has even come down and said it's okay to retaliate against somebody, pardon me, to retaliate against somebody because they go against this and they go all the way. Even though the Supreme Court has said it's unconstitutional to retaliate against somebody for exercising their civil rights, it's okay to give them a harsher penalty if they go to a trial and they don't plea out to begin with. She had no way to defend her case because the government forbid her from defending her case. So she took a plea deal to avoid a 10-year sentence. Still harsher than any other one else because she wanted to make an example out of her. Pardon me. Whenever I start talking, I start getting an itch in my throat. It's the time of year. Welcome to winter in Montana. And by the way, we have a lot of ice and snow and everything else outside right now. It's really cold. So don't recommend tourist travel this time of year. But anyway, there's no doubt in my mind this was politically motivated. President Trump had and continues to spend an inordinate amount of time denying Russia's involvement, denying any connections to Russia, denying any influence Russia had over the election. She was prosecuted under a crime that did not even apply. Yes, she released confidential information from an NSA report. NSA report did not put any national interests at risk, which is a requirement of the law. In order to be held accountable under this law, she had to have released information which affected national security, and she did not. Nothing in that document was compromised American security. Nothing. And again, I'm going to be posting the link to that in this video, in this text of this video. Sometimes when you have a report that's published and it's largely uncensored, you can see there's no actual threat. But propaganda, because it's designed to suggest she was a foreign sympathizer, because it was designed to suggest and say that it was, and had a court of law enforce that, if she had violated that, she would actually at that point be guilty of not only contempt, but of another crime. because now she's releasing the information again. And the court's already said, upon review of the document, that it represented a threat to national security, which it did not. The only person harmed by this report was President Donald Trump. Only person in the entire United States that was damaged by this report was Donald Trump. Oh, and anybody collaterally through his administration, but directly harmed was Donald Trump. Because it exposed political aid from a foreign power, which in and of itself was illegal, but it killed his ego to say he didn't do it on his own. He wasn't a self-made man, and he needed help from his buddies over in Russia to even have a chance of winning. He doesn't want anyone to think that. He thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. Whether you like Trump or you hate Trump, you have to acknowledge the man thinks he is the best thing since Christ. He can do no wrong. He cannot be wrong about anything. And he doesn't need anybody's help because he's a self-made man, which in itself is a lie. He'll tell you he was a self-made man, but he got $1 million loan from his very rich daddy to start his business, his first business. That's not a self-made man. Daddy gave him $1 million. And back in the 80s, $1 million was worth a lot more than it is today. That's like giving somebody $100 million today. Here's $100 million to start up a business, to start up a real estate business. I'm serious. You can't call yourself a self-made man when you're raised with a silver spoon in your mouth, and then you're given $1 million to go out and create a business of your own. And the man went bankrupt, like I think 3 or 4 times. I can't remember. He wasn't exactly the world's best businessman, but he was a great PR manager. He's a great propagandist. He was wonderful at the propaganda machine, and that's it. Propaganda won him the election. He became a popularity contest, and he won with some help from Russia. Like it or not, that's the truth. The fact is, he won. And I'm not going to sit here with any of these "not my president" memes or anything like that. The fact is, he won. Regardless of circumstances, regardless of the criteria by which he won, he did win. In counterpoint, in 2020, he did lose. I mean, let's face it. He won in one election that many of us didn't like. He lost in another one that also many of us didn't like. But the fact is, regardless of the reasons or the circumstances, he did win once, he did lose once. That's the facts. You don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's the facts. And we have to live with the facts, because otherwise we're living in a world of propaganda. And I should point out, before I go one step further into this, reality is still barred by federal law, even though she's been released, to speak about the content of this report, which would exonerate her. It's out there for public consumption. Anybody can read it. The one person who can't talk about it is the person who released it. Anybody, I can talk about it. You can talk about it. The news agencies can talk about it. The president can talk about it. Everybody can talk about it. The only person who's forbidden to talk about it is reality. Reality Winner is just not able to talk about this at all. Otherwise, she goes back to prison. Or, worse yet, she'd get a new crime. There's the power of propaganda for you. Propaganda, it doesn't end with politics. By no stretch of the imagination. I kind of referenced this back at the beginning of the video, and I'll keep going in this a little bit. But propaganda can take many forms. Sometimes it can be, and I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, I have a friend right now suffering under the sways of somebody who's a schizophrenic. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that to be insulting or derogatory. I'm not using any kind of demeaning intent when I say that. It is my honest and genuine belief, and no, I'm not a medical person, okay? But it is my honest belief this person is schizophrenic. If not bipolar, but definitely schizophrenic. She suffers from massive hallucinations. She's not making up stories. She genuinely believes these stories. But sometimes propaganda can take this form. As with Donald Trump, who through his own ego and self-importance genuinely believes, and I honestly believe he genuinely believes this, that he won the election on his own, and he also genuinely believes he won the 2020 election. I don't think he's out there spreading lies. I think he genuinely believes this because his ego and his mental capacity can't accept that, one, he needed help to win the first election from a foreign power, which was illegal, or two, that he could have lost the second election because he can't see it in his own mind. And the mind in this particular case is where the propaganda extends. Regardless whether it's from mental illness or otherwise, people believe propaganda. It starts out with a story. The story becomes a novel. The novel becomes an epic series. It starts small often, and it builds power the further along it goes. It gets more followers. It gets more these same followers to stick to it because they don't want to be wrong, so they stick to the original plan. There's an old psychological analogy that says that we tend to stick with our first impressions. If I walk up on somebody and he's slovenly, he's got drool on his face, and he just looks disgusting, even if I see him later all cleaned up, and I'm going to remember that first impression. That's going to be my influence of this person. And I'm going to stick with that impression because psychologically we set ourselves on first impressions, and that's how we define our world. If we walk into a place and we like it, typically we're going to stay liking it. We walk into a place and don't like it, we aren't going to like it. Even if we get a number of things that try to sway us to like it, we're not going to like it because that was our first impression. And it works the same way with propaganda. Once you're exposed to information for the first time, whether it's true or false, you tend to hold on to that first impression. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, right now I'm dealing with a personal conflict just over the last few days. I have a very close personal friend who has fallen into the sway of somebody who has a schizophrenic complex. No matter how ridiculous the stories, she believes this other woman because she wants a girlfriend. She wants to have somebody who accepts her and likes her and whatever else. And she's latched onto this girl, and she absolutely believes her rhetoric. I mean, she's literally known this woman for 4 days. And in those 4 days, she has literally become the gospel truth for my friend. It's created a huge rift between us, and I don't think it's surmountable because she's decided that this schizophrenic friend is more credible and believable and desirable to be around than anybody. I've known her for over a year. I've spent an incredible amount of time supporting her, helping her financially. Even though I don't have a lot of money to spare myself, I still help her financially. I buy her food. I pick up her medicines for her. I do all these kind of things. And despite the fact that I've been there for her consistently, this person has, in 4 days, has gained more influence over her and more control over her than I've ever seen anybody just overwhelmed by propaganda and false information. And just so we're clear, I'm not saying schizophrenia lightly. This woman honestly believes that she's stopping lava from bursting out of the Hungry Horse Dam, which is located just north and east of Kalispell. That she needs to go up on a semi-regular basis and quote-unquote throw a lever to keep the lava from being released. She talks about going out nightly with her platoon for secret ops. Today, my friend actually, when this schizophrenic person, I'm trying not to use names, which is why I'm keep using the word schizophrenic. I'm not doing it to reinforce anything negative. I'm just trying to say this schizophrenic person was going on today about how she just came home from a secret ops and she's tired of coming home alone from these secret operations and everything else. My friend actually said, "Thank you for your service." I'm sorry. I don't know about the people out there, but that's incredibly insulting to actual military people who are members of the armed forces, who are out there risking their lives, who are out there doing these things, whether it be first responders, whether it be uh, medical people, fire people, police officers. And yes, I have problems with the Kalispell Police Department, but not police officers in general. The people who are out there, the first responders, the public assistants, the people who are out there fighting for the freedom of our country, who put their lives on the line every single day, they deserve thanks. But when you thank a schizophrenic for a fabricated story about going on secret operations to stop invasions of from wherever, and you thank her for her service, that is a huge disrespect. Huge disrespect. I have family members who've been military. I haven't been military myself, but my father was in the Vietnam War. Both my grandfathers were in World War II. I've had other relatives who've served in various functions in the military through the time. And my nephew was in the military. I'm sorry. Every time I see somebody walking through Walmart or Public or anywhere else wearing a veteran's hat, I stop and I thank them for their service because they are genuine heroes. Regardless of whether you believe in the war they fought for, or regardless of whether you believe in the administration or the reason, the truth is they are patriots who put their life on the line for our country. They deserve gratitude. They deserve thanks for their service. Not somebody who makes it up for her own self-glorification. And don't get me wrong, she genuinely believes these fantasies that wrap around in her head. She genuinely believes she's outdoing these things. She genuinely believes she's going up there and somehow mentally controlling where the lava flows out. She genuinely believes that she's going out in the middle of the night, walking out the side of the door, and then coming back in, and she announces that she's stopped the hounds from attacking, and now all the dogs in town will be docile because she went outside and she calmed them down. She has a key fob that she believes is actually controlling 17 cars. A key fob, by the way, that has a broken key on it. It can't start a single car. But she'll stop and press the button and say, now she's turned on every car alarm in town, and she presses it again and say, now I've turned everyone off. Just today, she was sitting there going, where's that alarm? Where's that alarm? There's no alarm going off. Where's that alarm? All the alarms are going off, and she's pushing this button on this key fob. Okay, that stopped the alarms. My friend is 100% buying into this. This woman actually threatened me. Threatened me. When my friend's manager came around and saw this schizophrenic person for the first time, he recognized her for what she was and said she can't be on the property. His words were, I've seen too many people like her. I'm not going to put up with this. She can't be here. My friend then proceeded to keep her on the property anyway. Hours later, I finally just said, look, you need to go because this is endangering my friend. Get your things. I will drive you wherever you want to go. Just get your things. She got her things. She wanted to go to a local casino. So I went to drive her there with her. And on the way, she proceeds to tell me, well, when I go back over to my friend's house, that, and I'm like, well, I stopped and says, no. You can't go back over there. If you want to go hang out with my friend again, you'll need to meet her away from the property because the property manager has already said you're not welcome there. To which this person tells me, you can't tell me where I can and can't go. I said, no, the management has, and if you go back, my friend will lose her place. The schizophrenic turned to me and said, you're going to lose your face. You're going to lose your face. And I said, that has to be like possibly the most abusive thing anybody has ever said. You just threatened to cut off my face. And she said, God told me to say that. God told me to say that. I turned to her and I said, God told you, bleep. I'm not going to repeat it here. And I dropped her off. And I was hoping that we were done with her. She's been back every day since. My friend's falling more and more under her rapture. I've told my friend this story, and my friend literally, I've known her a year. She's known this woman for 4 days. And my friend, when I told her this person threatened, and I told her the conversation, and my friend said, I don't believe you. I've known my friend a year. She's known me a year. She's known this woman for 4 days. This schizophrenic woman is threatened by the fact that I don't buy into her stories. But she knows that my friend does. And she's coveting my friend. She's grooming my friend. I sit in the same room with her, and she does nothing but insult me and put me down, and my friend defends her. She tries to take credit for my stories, my books. She'll sit here. I told my friend, hey, I need to run this, because I told her I'd run an errand for her. And I said, I need to run this errand now, or I can come back afterwards, but I have to go home to record my podcast. And the schizophrenic says, yeah, you need to go. The sooner the better. And I just sat there and went, are you kidding me? And I turned to my friend, and my friend immediately defends the schizophrenic and says, she didn't mean anything like by that. I mean, you didn't mean anything by that. You're just saying that, he needs to get home to do his thing. She says, oh yes, because you have to go home and finish telling my story and talking about all my things. And I responded, I've never talked about your things on my podcast. Never talked about you on my podcast. This is actually the first time I ever brought her up. And of course, my friend immediately says, see, she likes your podcast. That's why she wants you to go, because she wants to make sure you get your podcast done. Are you kidding me? She puts me down. She insults me. She degrades me. She belittles me. I speak up about it, and I'm the bad guy. That's how powerful propaganda is. Because once my friend became invested in the schizophrenic story and versions, now she's invested. No matter how insane, no matter how crazy, no matter how out of touch with reality her friend's stories are, she accepts them as gospel truth. And so I said, please make this call, set this up so I can do your errand, so I can just go home. At which point she said, well, I'll just walk over there and do it myself. Now keep in mind, as I've mentioned previously in this podcast, it is incredibly cold, icy, and slick, and everything else outside. Nobody wants to be walking in this stuff, but she would rather walk with her schizophrenic friend than have me go run the errand for her. And so I said, fine, you don't need me. I'm leaving. And at this point in time, I have no intention of going back. There's just nothing to be gained here. She's fallen under the sway of the schizophrenic, the propaganda, and and all the beliefs that she has, my friend is adopting, taking into heart, taking as true. And she'd rather give up the person who supported her for a year than the person she's known for 4 days, because that's how powerful propaganda is. It can influence you in a way, and once you're into it, that's it. You're hooked. Propaganda is insidious. It truly is. In this particular case, this situation between my friend and I has caused a serious rift between us. The schizophrenic knows I don't believe her, and so she's doing everything in her power to make this rift real and permanent. My friend defends her. At this point in time, I don't think I can call her a friend. Friends don't allow their friends to be sat there and insulted and put down and degraded over and over and over again, and then defend the person who's doing the abuse. That's what she's doing. She doesn't even believe me when I tell her, literally, this woman threatened me. She tells me she does not believe me. And even when the woman came back over today when I was there, and I confronted her about it. And I said, hey, we're having a fight right now because she doesn't believe me that you threatened to cut my face off. And of course, the schizophrenic says, that's not even what I said. I said, your face, I said, you, and I relayed the conversation. I said, this is what you said. I said, you can't come over to Nicole's, sorry, to my friend's place. You can't come over. She's going to lose her place. Your response was, you're going to lose your face. To which I responded, that has to be the single most abusive thing I've ever heard. You just threatened to cut off my face. And she said, God told me to say that. To which the schizophrenic says, that's not even what it said. That's not even what I said. I said, your face isn't going to be here for me anymore. And and my friend says, well, what did you mean by that? Were you just trying? Or did you mean something that wasn't threatening? Did you mean something that wasn't very? And immediately the schizophrenic latches on to the idea that what she'd said wasn't acceptable. So she says, "Oh no, what I was saying was, as far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to see him anymore because I was just going to ignore him." She threatened me, ladies and gentlemen. There was no doubt about it. There was no question about it. But the moment after my friend sits here and says, "No, I don't believe you," and then when the schizophrenic actually confirms that at least a version of the story was true, my friend still defends her. Said, see, it was all a misunderstanding. You didn't understand what she meant. No, I knew exactly what she meant. Because I asked her for clarification. I said, you just threatened to cut off my face. To which she said, God told me to say that. She threatened to take off my face. I wasn't going to have a face. My friend believes her. Propaganda is so insidious. It gets into people's minds and it roots into their heart and their soul, and it just changes even the most stable, reliable people into potential monsters. It changes them on a basic level once they allow that propaganda to take root. It becomes something that's so powerful that it's hard to dislodge. People who fall under the sway of propaganda are victims. 100% they're victims. They're not the ones who are the guilty parties. The guilty party is the person who's manipulating them, because that is what propaganda does. It manipulates you to get you to believe in a certain reality. Whether it be true or not, it creates that influence. It preys too often on the weak-minded or needy people, or people who are in circumstances of isolation, as my friend is. My friend suffers from social anxiety, and it's very hard for her to get out and meet people. So when this person's showing up at her door constantly, and she sees it as this welcome window of acceptance, the schizophrenic is preying upon her need for acceptance. But once the victim buys into the initial premise and accepts the initial premise as true, it commits it to not being wrong. It becomes a situation to where it becomes a in for a penny, in for a pound ratio. I've already accepted the premise, and therefore everything that follows must also be true, because otherwise the premise is wrong, and I don't want to admit I'm wrong. And rarely do people actually make that conscious connection. It's a subliminal thing. People don't want to be wrong. People don't want to be accused of being wrong. People want to be right. People want to be good. They want to be powerful. They don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to be called out on things they have done that are not right. So once they latch onto the premise, once they accept the premise as true, propaganda gains influence, just as with reality, where once the propaganda set into the court, there was nothing she could do about it. No matter how many times her defense tried to bang against the wall and say, this isn't right, this isn't fair, this isn't just, it didn't matter. The court had already made up its mind, and the court wasn't going to change its mind, and she went to prison. An honorably discharged, massively honorable former servicewoman, went to prison to protect President Donald Trump, to retaliate against and to set an example so that people like President Donald Trump's own propaganda machine could remain intact. Like I said, it's used in politics, it's used in government, and it's had a monumental effect on how Montana government keeps me where I'm at. It motivates public to believe the worst. People who accept the premise often create their own versions and their own extensions of the premise to justify their beliefs. Even whenever it gets challenged, well, what about this? No, I know other facts, which they don't know other facts. They're just making them up because it justifies their belief. Just as my friend sits here and supports and asks for clarification to defend her own beliefs and helps fill in the gaps for the schizophrenic, so too do people in this community sit here and gladly toss onto the wagon more made up stories just to justify their belief in this to be true. Because the more they realize it's not true, the more more savagely they're going to sit here and try to find reasons that it is. The power of propaganda. As always, if you like the podcast, please support us. Go to YouTube, look for the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast, like and subscribe. If you're not watching this on YouTube and there's not a text attachment, like I said, this particular one's going to be somewhat important, so I'm going to provide a link to the document that Reality released, that the news agency released and made public. By all means, go to monspiracy.podbean.com. That's where the original source of this podcast originates. But like I said, you're certainly welcome to look for me on other podcast sites. But as I end this and wrap this up for the day, please remember, whenever possible, please be safe. And again, as always, whenever possible, please be free. Thank you.